At exactly 6:47 in the evening, 73-year-old Walter Sterling was driving home from Hartsfield-Jackson Airport when his phone vibrated on the passenger seat. He almost ignored it because he had always believed that a man should keep his eyes on the road, especially at his age. But the notification was different from an ordinary message. It was the emergency alert tone he had personally assigned to Martha Cole, the 61-year-old housekeeper who had worked for him for more than a decade. Martha never used that alert unless something was seriously wrong. Walter slowed his black Cadillac, moved carefully onto the shoulder, and reached for his phone. The message contained only 3 sentences. "Mr. Sterling, please do not come home. Pull over somewhere safe. Check the living room security camera now." Walter read it twice. His fingers became cold. "Martha, what have you seen?" he whispered, even though she could not hear him. He opened the security application with a trembling thumb. The camera feed loaded, and for several seconds he saw nothing unusual. Then a figure crossed the living room. Walter leaned closer to the screen. Another person appeared behind the first. His breathing stopped for a moment when he recognized them. They were not strangers breaking into his house. They were Caleb Sterling, his 34-year-old son, and Caleb's wife, Vanessa Sterling. Walter stared at the screen in disbelief. Less than an hour earlier, he had watched them walk through the airport doors with their luggage, smiling and waving goodbye before leaving for the 2-week Paris vacation he had paid for. Yet there they were inside his house. Walter slowly lowered the phone. "That's impossible," he murmured. Then he noticed something that made the situation even more disturbing. Caleb was not looking around like someone who had secretly returned home. He was standing calmly beside Vanessa while she opened one of Walter's locked cabinets. Walter had spent 40 years designing bridges, towers, and commercial buildings. He understood pressure, hidden weaknesses, and structural failure. But as he watched his own son moving through his house like an owner, Walter finally realized that the greatest weakness in his life had never been hidden inside a building. It had been sitting at his family dinner table. Walter Sterling had spent most of his life believing that a strong family was built the same way as a strong bridge, carefully, patiently, and with enough support to survive the storms. He had been raised in a working-class neighborhood outside Atlanta, where his father had taught him that a man's name was worth more than his bank account. Walter carried that lesson into adulthood. After graduating with a degree in structural engineering, he spent 4 decades building a respected career, eventually becoming the lead consultant on major construction projects across several states. His work made him wealthy, but money had never been his greatest achievement. He believed his greatest achievement was Caleb. Unfortunately, Caleb had grown into a man Walter barely recognized. After Caleb left college, Walter helped him secure a management position with one of his longtime construction partners. Caleb lasted less than a year. "Dad, those people treat employees like machines," Caleb complained after resigning. Walter had looked at him across the kitchen table and asked, "And what exactly do you think work is supposed to be?" Caleb shrugged. "I just want something better." Walter sighed. "Something better comes after you prove yourself." Caleb never understood that lesson. Then Vanessa entered his life. She was charming, confident, and unusually attentive to Walter. At first, he welcomed her. She called him Mr. Sterling with respect, brought him small gifts, and constantly praised the sacrifices he had made for Caleb. "You raised an amazing man," she told him during their first family dinner. Walter smiled proudly. He still has a lot to learn. Vanessa laughed. "Don't worry, I'll help him." After Caleb married her, however, Vanessa's attention slowly changed. She began asking questions about Walter's finances, properties, investments, and estate plans. Walter noticed, but he dismissed his concerns because he wanted to believe his son had finally found happiness. His late wife, Evelyn Sterling, had died 5 years earlier. An emptiness she left behind made Walter cling even more tightly to the family he had left. Evelyn had always warned him not to confuse love with trust. "Walter," she once told him, "you can forgive someone and still keep your eyes open." He remembered those words now as he watched Caleb and Vanessa on his security camera. For the first time, he wondered whether Evelyn had seen something he had refused to see. The morning of the airport trip had seemed completely ordinary, which was perhaps what frightened Walter most later. He had arrived at Caleb's house shortly after 8, expecting his son and Vanessa to be waiting with their luggage. Instead, Vanessa came outside wearing a cream-colored travel dress, sunglasses, and a broad hat that made her look like she belonged in a luxury magazine. "Walter, you actually came yourself," she said brightly. "Of course," he replied. "You two are going on your dream vacation. The least I can do is take you to the airport." Caleb appeared behind her carrying a suitcase. He looked tired rather than excited. Walter noticed his son's nervous expression, but did not question it. For large suitcases went into the trunk of the Cadillac. Walter raised an eyebrow. 2 weeks in Paris requires all this. Vanessa laughed. "You have no idea how many outfits I need." Caleb smiled weakly. "She's been planning this trip for months." As Walter drove toward the airport, Vanessa kept talking about Paris. "We're going to see the Louvre, take a boat ride, eat at all those beautiful restaurants, and finally see the Eiffel Tower at night." Walter glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "Your mother and I always wanted to do that together." His voice softened when he mentioned Evelyn. The conversation suddenly became quiet. Caleb looked out the window. Walter noticed the silence but continued driving. "Your mother loved Paris," he said. "She used to say she would dance beneath the Eiffel Tower when she turned 60. Vanessa gave a small smile. "She sounds wonderful." "She was," Walter answered. At the terminal, Walter helped unload the luggage. Caleb hugged him, but the embrace felt unusually brief. "Thanks for everything, Dad," Caleb said. Walter patted his shoulder. "Call me when you land." Vanessa stepped forward and kissed Walter's cheek. "Take care of yourself. And don't forget your medication." Walter smiled. "I'm 73, Vanessa, not 93. She laughed. "I know. I'm just looking after you." Then she whispered, "You've done so much for us. We won't forget it." Walter watched them disappear through the sliding doors. He stood beside his car for another minute, feeling proud and strangely peaceful. He had no idea that the people he had just sent toward the airport were not actually preparing to leave Atlanta. And he certainly had no idea that someone else had already uncovered the lie. Walter merged onto the highway and headed home, thinking about the quiet evening ahead. His house would feel unusually large without Caleb and Vanessa around, but he had become accustomed to silence since Evelyn's death. He planned to make coffee, play an old jazz record, and work on the wooden model ship sitting unfinished on his study desk. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to think about retirement. "Maybe it is time," he said quietly. "Maybe I have worked long enough." He smiled at the thought. Then the emergency notification sounded. Walter glanced at the phone and immediately recognized Martha's name. His stomach tightened. Martha had worked for him since before Caleb married Vanessa. She had known Evelyn, helped Walter through the worst months after her death, and had earned his trust through years of quiet loyalty. She was not the kind of person who panicked easily. Walter pulled onto the shoulder and opened the message. "Don't come home," he read aloud. "Check the living room camera." He immediately opened the security system. The image was clear. His living room appeared exactly as it had that morning. The furniture was in place. Evelyn's framed photograph sat above the fireplace. Everything looked normal until Caleb entered the frame. Walter's face hardened. "Caleb," he whispered. Vanessa followed him. She was carrying a small black case Walter had never seen before. Caleb walked directly toward the wall where Walter kept an old painting. He moved the painting aside, revealing the electronic safe behind it. Walter stared in disbelief. "How does he know about that?" he asked. Then the camera angle changed slightly as Caleb looked directly toward the security device. Walter instinctively lowered the brightness on his phone. "What are you doing, son?" he whispered. Suddenly another message arrived from Martha. Do not call Caleb. Do not confront Vanessa. They believe you are already on your way home. Walter's heart began pounding. He typed back, Martha, where are you? Her reply came almost immediately. I am safe. I saw them enter through the back door. They thought I had gone home. I stayed hidden because I heard them talking. Walter stared at the words. What did you hear? He typed. Martha. Took nearly a minute to respond. Then the message appeared. They were not talking about Paris. They were talking about what happens to you tonight. Walter leaned back against a seat. For the first time in 40 years, the engineer who had faced hurricanes, collapsing structures, and dangerous construction sites felt completely unprepared. His son was inside his house. His daughter-in-law was opening his safe. And someone he trusted had just warned him that the danger was not outside his home. It was already inside. Walter called Martha instead of sending another message, but she answered only after several rings and spoke in a whisper. Mr. Sterling, where are you? I'm still on the highway, Walter said. Tell me everything. Martha took a shaky breath. I came back because I forgot my prescription glasses in the guest room. When I entered through the kitchen, I heard voices in the living room. At first, I thought you had returned early. Walter's grip tightened around the steering wheel. Then you saw Caleb? Yes, Martha replied. And Vanessa? Did they see you? No. I stayed behind the pantry door. Walter closed his eyes briefly. What were they doing? Martha hesitated. They were looking through your documents. They were talking about your house, your accounts, and the property downtown. Walter felt a heavy pressure settle in his chest. Did they say why? I heard Vanessa say that everything had to be finished before you discovered what they had done. Walter's voice became quieter. What have they done? Martha did not answer immediately. I don't know everything, sir, but I heard Caleb say something about a signature. Walter looked toward the road ahead. A signature? Yes. He said once you signed the papers, nobody could stop them. Walter's mind raced through every document he had signed over the past year. He remembered the estate planning meeting Vanessa had encouraged him to attend. He remembered Caleb insisting that Walter should simplify his affairs. He remembered Vanessa saying, "You don't want your family fighting over things after you're gone." At the time, Walter had thought it was practical advice. Now, those conversations sounded completely different. Martha, he said, listen carefully. Do not leave the house unless you know it is safe. Stay hidden. What are you going to do? She asked. Walter looked at the security feed again. Caleb was now standing beside the safe while Vanessa held a folder. Walter's eyes narrowed. I'm going to find out exactly what my son thinks he has stolen from me. Martha immediately protested. Mr. Sterling, please don't go there. Walter shook his head. I'm not going home. He paused, then added, not yet. The old engineer began thinking like he had during emergencies on construction sites. He needed information before action. He needed to know every weakness in the structure before touching it. And if Caleb and Vanessa believed they had trapped an old man alone in Atlanta, Walter was going to let them keep believing it. Because for the first time in his life, he was prepared to stop treating betrayal like a family problem and start treating it like a threat to his entire legacy. Walter did not drive home. Instead, he continued down the highway until he reached a quiet shopping center several miles away, where he parked beneath a large oak tree and turned off the engine. He needed time to think, but more importantly, he needed to understand what Caleb and Vanessa were trying to accomplish. Martha, he said over the phone, keeping his voice calm, I need you to stay exactly where you are. Do not make a sound unless you have to. I understand, Martha whispered. But what are you going to do? Walter looked at the security feed on his phone. Caleb was still standing near the hidden safe. Vanessa had opened the folder and was pointing at something on one of the pages. I'm going to watch, Walter replied. Sometimes people reveal more when they think nobody is listening. Martha remained silent for a moment. Then she said, Mr. Sterling, there is something else I haven't told you." Walter frowned. "What is it?" "This isn't the first time I've seen them behaving strangely." Walter straightened in his seat. "How long?" "About 3 months." Walter's expression changed. 3 months? "Yes. They started coming to the house when you were at work. At first, I thought they were visiting to check on you, but then they began asking me questions." "What kind of questions?" Martha lowered her voice. "They wanted to know where you kept your important papers. They asked whether you had changed your will. They asked about your properties. And Vanessa asked me whether you still kept the old black notebook your wife used." Walter's eyes widened. The notebook contained Evelyn's handwritten notes about family finances and several personal instructions she had left for him. "Did you tell them anything?" "No," Martha said firmly. "Your wife trusted me, and I never forgot that." Walter leaned back. "Thank you." He watched the screen again. Vanessa suddenly looked toward Caleb and said something. The camera did not capture the audio, but Walter could read her lips enough to understand one word: tonight. His stomach tightened. He immediately called an old professional colleague, Samuel Brooks, a retired attorney who had handled some of Walter's business affairs. Samuel answered on the third ring. "Walter? What's wrong?" "I need you to do something for me," Walter said, "and I need you to do it quietly." Samuel sensed the seriousness in his voice. "Tell me." Walter glanced at the camera once more. "I think my son and his wife have been planning to take control of my estate. I need you to check every legal document filed in my name during the past year." Samuel became silent. "Walter, are you saying someone forged your signature?" "I don't know yet," Walter replied, "but I intend to find out before they realize I know." While Samuel began making his calls, Walter kept watching the cameras. Inside the house, Vanessa opened another drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. Caleb stood beside her with his arms crossed. Their conversation was still silent on the security feed, but Walter knew his son well enough to recognize his nervous movements. Caleb kept rubbing his palms together and looking toward the hallway. Vanessa, however, appeared completely calm. She seemed to be directing the entire operation. Suddenly Caleb spoke toward the camera's blind spot, and Walter saw him shake his head. Vanessa stepped closer to him. Walter increased the volume on the app, but the outdoor microphone did not capture anything useful. Then his phone rang. It was Samuel. "Walter, I found something," the attorney said. "What?" "There was a power of attorney filed 6 months ago. It gives Caleb broad control over your financial affairs." Walter's face became still. "I never signed a power of attorney." "That's what I suspected." Samuel continued, "There is also an amendment to your estate plan. It appears to transfer several major assets into a family trust." Walter stared through the windshield. "Who is listed as trustee?" Samuel paused. "Caleb Sterling." Walter closed his eyes. For several seconds he said nothing. "Walter?" Samuel asked. "I am here," he finally replied. "Continue." "There is more. A second document was submitted 3 weeks ago. It appears to authorize the sale of your downtown property." Walter's voice became cold. "That property is worth several $1,000,000. "I know, and I never authorized its sale." "Then we have a serious problem." Walter looked back at the security footage. "Not yet," he said. "We have evidence." Samuel understood immediately. "What do you want me to do?" "Get copies of everything. Secure every original document you can. Contact the appropriate authorities if necessary, but do not alert my son yet." Samuel sighed. "Walter, if these people have forged your documents, you cannot handle this alone." "I'm not planning to." Walter ended the call and immediately dialed another number. It belonged to Detective Aaron Mitchell, a retired investigator who had worked with Walter on a fraud case years earlier. Aaron answered with surprise. "Walter Sterling? It's been years." "Aaron, I need help." Walter explained everything without exaggeration. He sent copies of the security footage and the suspicious documents Samuel had already obtained. Aaron became serious. "Stay away from the house tonight," he advised. "Let me review what you have." Walter nodded, even though Aaron could not see him. "I will." Then he looked at the live feed again. Vanessa had just placed the envelope inside her handbag. Caleb was staring at the front door. Walter suddenly understood that whatever they were planning had moved into its final stage. At 9:15 that evening, Walter received another message from Martha. "They are talking about you again." Walter immediately called her. "What are they saying?" he asked. Martha whispered. "Vanessa told Caleb that you will be home soon because you always come straight home after the airport." Walter looked at the clock. "Did Caleb say anything?" "He asked whether you had eaten." Walter frowned. Why would he ask that? Martha hesitated. "Because Vanessa told him you would be tired, and she wanted him to make sure you were comfortable when you arrived." Walter's expression hardened. "Comfortable?" Martha answered, "Yes." Those were her words. Walter looked at Aaron's messages. The investigator had advised him not to enter the house. Walter trusted that advice. "Martha, listen to me. I want you to leave through the back entrance when I tell you. Aaron is sending someone to meet you." "What about your house?" Martha asked. Walter looked at the security feed one more time. "A house can be rebuilt. Trust cannot." A few minutes later, Aaron called. "Walter, I have enough to move forward," he said. "The documents you've shown me appear deeply suspicious. I also checked the travel information." Walter's eyes narrowed. "The Paris tickets?" "Exactly. The tickets are real, but Caleb and Vanessa never boarded the flight." Walter stared at the phone. "I knew it." Aaron continued. "They checked in, but they left the airport before boarding. Someone picked them up outside." Walter felt a strange sadness rather than anger. "My own son." Aaron replied gently, "Don't make this about revenge, Walter. Make it about protecting yourself." Walter nodded. "You're right." Then the front camera suddenly showed something unexpected. A dark SUV had pulled into his driveway. Two men stepped out and entered through the side gate. Walter's voice became quiet. "Aaron, we have company." Aaron immediately responded, "Stay where you are. Do not approach the property." Walter watched the men enter the house. Vanessa greeted them as though she had been expecting them. Caleb looked frightened. One of the men handed Vanessa a folder. Walter's heart sank. Whatever plan they had prepared involved more people than his son and daughter-in-law. Then Vanessa pointed toward the study. Caleb followed her reluctantly. Walter remembered the hidden documents in that room and immediately understood what they wanted. "They are looking for Evelyn's notebook," he said. Aaron asked, "Why?" Walter answered, "Because my wife knew everything." Suddenly Martha's voice came through the phone. "Mr. Sterling, I found it." Walter froze. "Found what?" "The notebook." Walter's eyes widened. "Where?" "Your wife's old sewing room. She hid it behind the wooden frame." Walter remembered Evelyn's strange habit of moving important things into places nobody would think to search. "Martha, get out now." "I can't," she whispered. "They are standing in the hallway." Walter's heart raced. "Stay hidden. Help is coming." He watched the camera feed helplessly as Caleb opened the study door. Then he saw something he never expected. Caleb looked directly toward the hallway and said, "Martha, I know you're here." Walter's blood ran cold. For several seconds, nobody moved. Martha remained hidden while Caleb stood in the hallway calling her name. "Martha, you don't have to be afraid," he said. "We just need to talk." Walter watched the screen and realized Caleb was lying. His son sounded calm, but Walter could see fear in his eyes. Vanessa approached him and whispered something. Caleb shook his head. "No," he replied. "She worked for Dad for years. She won't betray him." Vanessa's expression hardened. She already has. Walter immediately called Aaron. They know Martha is inside. Aaron answered, "Officers are on the way. Stay away from the property." Walter nodded. Then he heard Martha whisper, "Mr. Sterling, I found something else." "What?" "Your wife's notebook contains names." Walter's heart skipped. "Whose names?" Martha said, "People who met with Caleb and Vanessa before your estate documents were changed." Walter understood. Evelyn had always kept careful records. She had noticed patterns long before he had. "Martha, get the notebook somewhere safe." "I will." Before she could say anything else, the call ended. Walter watched helplessly. Inside the house, Caleb entered the sewing room. Vanessa followed him. The camera showed Caleb searching drawers while Vanessa stood near the door. Suddenly, Caleb stopped. He had found the wooden frame. He pulled it from the wall and looked behind it. His expression changed when he found the hidden compartment empty. Vanessa rushed toward him. "Where is it?" she demanded. Caleb shook his head. "It's gone." "Who took it?" Vanessa asked. Caleb looked toward the hallway. "Martha." Vanessa became furious. "Then find her." Walter's jaw tightened. He could no longer sit in the car pretending this was only a family dispute. But before he could make a move, headlights appeared at the end of the driveway. Several vehicles arrived. Aaron had kept his word. Officers entered the property and ordered everyone to remain where they were. Vanessa immediately began protesting. "This is my father-in-law's house. We have every right to be here." One officer calmly asked, "Then you won't mind explaining why you entered without his permission?" Vanessa stopped speaking. Caleb lowered his head. Martha was escorted safely from her hiding place. She carried Evelyn's notebook against her chest. When she saw Walter later that night at a secure location, she handed it to him. Walter opened the first page and saw Evelyn's handwriting. The first sentence read, "Walter, if you are reading this because something has happened to our family, trust what you see, not what you wish were true." Walter's eyes filled with tears. Evelyn had understood the danger long before he did. The notebook contained records of suspicious meetings, copies of financial statements, and notes about conversations she had overheard. More importantly, it contained evidence showing that Caleb had been manipulated by Vanessa and several outside associates who wanted control of Walter's property. Caleb had not created the entire plan, but he had willingly participated. Walter closed the notebook slowly. He was heartbroken, but he was no longer confused. 3 months later, Walter stood inside his renovated study, looking out over the garden Evelyn had planted years earlier. The legal battle had been difficult, but the truth had finally become clear. The suspicious power of attorney was invalid. The estate documents had been challenged. The attempted property transfer was stopped, and the people involved were facing serious legal consequences. Caleb had also admitted his role after realizing that Vanessa and the others had intended to use him as the person who would take responsibility if everything collapsed. Walter had not celebrated when he heard the confession. Instead, he had sat quietly in his chair and asked himself whether there was anything left to save between a father and his son. One afternoon, Caleb came to see him under legal supervision. He looked older than his 34 years. "Dad," he said quietly, "I don't expect you to forgive me." Walter remained silent. Caleb swallowed hard. "I was angry that you always believed I wasn't good enough. Vanessa told me that you would never respect me unless I controlled something you built." Walter finally looked at him. "You didn't need to control my buildings, Caleb. You needed to build something of your own." Caleb lowered his eyes. "I know that now." Walter sighed. "I loved you enough to give you everything except the discipline to earn it." Tears filled Caleb's eyes. "Can you ever trust me again?" Walter took a long breath. "Trust is not something I can give you because you are my son. You'll have to rebuild it, one honest decision at a time." Caleb nodded. Before leaving, he asked, What will happen to my inheritance? Walter looked toward Evelyn's photograph. Your inheritance will not disappear, he said, but it will no longer be something you receive simply because you carry my name. It will be protected, and if you prove that you have changed, you can earn access to it. Months later, Walter established a foundation in Evelyn's name to support young engineers and families struggling after financial betrayal. Martha remained part of his household, no longer simply as a housekeeper, but as one of the people Walter trusted most. One evening, as Walter stood beside the garden watching the sunset, Martha asked, "Do you regret sending Caleb to Paris?" Walter smiled sadly. "I didn't send him to Paris. I sent him away believing he was my son." Martha looked at him, and now. Walter glanced at Evelyn's photograph through the window. "Now I know that family isn't only about blood. It is about the people who protect you when they could betray you, tell you the truth when lies would be easier, and stand beside you when there is nothing to gain." He paused before adding, "I spent 40 years learning how to keep buildings from collapsing. It took one terrible night to teach me that the strongest foundation isn't concrete or steel. It's character." And from that day forward, Walter Sterling stopped measuring his legacy by the buildings bearing his name. He measured it by the lives he could still protect, the lessons he could still teach, and the courage to walk away from anyone, even family, who tried to turn his kindness into a weakness. Like and subscribe to my channel for more contents like this, and let us know where you are watching from under the comment section.